So I had about 25 years in top level football.
NFL, NBA, NHL, which we've worked on.
As a sports psychology group, we're always trying to help the coaches understand their players, but also the players to understand themselves.
What is actually on the line, the difference between success and failure, and the ability to push that extra bit further?
So they had an athlete from the NHL draft. He had a really extreme behaviour. Within 2 weeks, he wanted to leave. And through our AI, we used technology to understand who that talent is they spent tons of money on, and how to unlock that talent and how to onboard them.
Highly applicable within the sports environment, but you're actually describing something which is a benefit to all people. Malcolm Frame, Walter Farfan, good to have you here.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So you guys have been advancing AI in and around elite performance sports psychology. Roughly, do you want to give me a better view of what you're up to, what you've been doing?
Yeah, well, I'll let you start with the AI. That's
well,
probably the best place to start.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to be put into the Google campus as part of an accelerator program. We wanted to really understand language and how a language could decipher personality. So we thought we came across a great product in terms of understanding people with very, very little friction by analysing what you say and how you say it. So we could take a recording of someone, have someone record a voice note, and that could reveal their personality and can get us to know a lot about them. And we kind of stumbled into elite sports. We were knocking on doors trying to find out where this product would fit into a marketplace. Thought recruitment would be the one. Spoke to recruiter after recruiter with no success at all. And we stumbled into elite sports, and that's where I met Malcolm.
Yeah, I guess my background with that is that, so I had about 25 years in top level football. And actually, we were always, as a sports psychology group, we're always trying to help the coaches understand their players, but also the players to understand themselves, to see how we could actually intervene more effectively with them to optimise their performance. Optimise being the operative word, I think, there. So I used to work with a lot of psychometric companies to see actually what would be the best fit to understand about how we could actually get to know the players and the coaches get to know the players better. But we started stumbling across it was best to run it like a parallel system. So actually it's not only about the getting to know the players, it's the coaches getting to know themselves, about their coaching styles, and then therefore and how are they dealing with players. So it was about helping people understand each other so they could actually create the right environment for them to prosper, I guess, to optimize that. So we looked at a whole different things. In fact, I think I was one of the first sports science to bring in like emotional intelligence, looking at some of the the key psychometrics without going into detail. But it was always difficult. It was always difficult in about getting time to actually do that measurement, then time to feed back the measurement. Then you'd have to be present because it was about your understanding, your knowledge of that tool and that assessment, and give that back to the client, let's call them. So that was actually, it was quite a convoluted process. So when I started speaking to Walter, I could see the benefits of actually how could we do this much quicker, less friction within that process, and actually how we could get that accuracy. Then it just seemed a bit like a no-brainer that we really need to explore that. But when I started to look into it, it was about how do we build that in a very purposeful way to get the best out of it. So if you're going to build it through the AI system, I just really wanted to make sure that we actually had the right science in the system to really understand how we were getting to that end product. So I was at the time very much my area of interest and research was like embodied cognition, which in sport really is ecological dynamics. So fundamentally, it's about understanding the person within an environment, and it's not just about the brain, it's obviously about the physical nature as well, so they're embodied. So how do we understand them within that environment? So I could see this potential of really linking in, understanding what is the psychology behind that, and if we could understand the psychology within that, we could utilize the AI in a much more complex way of lining in, fading in, the understanding to get a better picture of that person.
And to give a bit more context, so that makes perfect sense in my mind. But what's up for grabs? Give some examples of championships, winning games, Premier Leagues, cup finals. What is actually on the line? But the difference between success and failure, and the ability to push that extra bit further.
Yeah, so hence I use that word optimize, right? Because you can never maximize anything, I believe. So it's optimizing that. So when you start to look at the top teams, because we're also looking at teams and the top players within that environment, it's the ability for them to actually utilize their resources within that game effectively. So I always used to say the performance is about the right skill at the right time and the right place, right? The right skill at the wrong time isn't a performance. It has to all come together. So to be able to do that, you have to have a particular process to do that. And actually, it's about making sure we get that process correct. Now, at the top of the game, I think that's what teams and individuals are doing. They're quickly reading the game effectively. They're seeing where the opportunities and affordances for actions are, and they're not perturbed. They're not thrown out of the system. They can take that information on board. They can self-regulate themselves and utilize that information really effectively. And they also know themselves really, really well. If you take Messi, for example, hopefully he's not listening too much for this, but I'm just taking him as an example because everybody knows him. If you look at him, he wouldn't fit the sort of idea of that 6'2" footballer. Has he got that strength and power? Possibly not for a 6'2" footballer. But what he does have is particular resources. And actually he knows and understands what his resources are and how he can apply those in the game to be effective with those resources and his timing of those resources. Now he's got some unbelievable resources. He reads the game really well. He's incredibly agile. He's over 5 meters. He's incredibly quick. So he's got all those sort of patterns of behavior, but he still has to deliver them in context of the game when the opportunity arises. So it's that perception and action coupling. If they can really perceive the game at the highest level and couple that with the correct actions, now what affects that is going to be your personality. Yeah. So how you read the game is going to be affected by who you are and how you identify in that space. So we're trying to really start to understand not about, which came a little bit later, but how could we support people? And that's really how we started communicating, because there's a key principle there. This is all about developing people to be the best versions of themselves. So how can we actually do that? And that means actually we have to have difficult conversations. There's a truth in here, things you have to work on that actually are going to make you the best version. It's not about avoiding the situation, it's accepting the reality of it. So I came across, or I started to develop a very sort of, because what people want is simplicity, right? They want the easiest answers here. And so I just came up with a very simple framework. And that framework was a 4A framework. Assess, accept, adapt, and apply. But it's iterative, so it keeps going around. It's what you're doing now. You're assessing what I'm talking about. You're accepting into some sort of reality of your world to do what with, to try and adapt it into your framework of the world, to apply that into the world. Now, we're all constantly doing that. Now, if that's a key fundamental then of being a human being in the world. So can we upgrade that system by understanding who you are, how you identify, what motivates you? And if we can do that along with the physical skills, then I think we're making a difference.
So to bring this into the context of a wider world, let's say the world of business, the world of our everyday lives, because it sounds to me like this is highly applicable within the sports environment, but you're actually describing something which is a benefit to all people. And I think then if we also consider what we believe AI to be today, given the public narrative, and then your interpretation of it, and Walter, you can give
I think, well, you put that across, it's high performance, right? In the sporting world, we certainly define it as high performance. Across military, it's high performance. But a student trying to do their best, they need to perform at a high level, right? And understand who they are, where they perform, their super strengths and their weaknesses. So I think it applies across all of that within the business world, the education world, the military world, or sports. Is how do you reach your level of high performance and sustain it?
And why did you, what is your personal drive to begin to really want to understand this?
Look, I'm a technologist at heart. I spent 25 years in legacy technology. I always wanted to understand how things work. And that led me to the Google campus. And the final frontier is trying to understand a little bit better how humans work. And we're complex, right? And we're dynamic. And for me, thinking that you could fill this form in that asks you a load of questions about your personality, and that's you static. You don't move, and I have to interpret that form. The doctor asks you how many units of alcohol you drink per week. Everyone halves it. That can't be the data source for you to make future decisions. It's corrupted data. So my drive was to understand humans at a deeper level. And then once we understand that, how do we empower them or their workplaces or their teams or etc. to what to do with that information? How do I actually train information? Malcolm calls it thriving in that information. In simplistic terms, what does it mean about me? Where will I thrive? Where may I find things slightly harder? And I can put myself in situations more.
Okay. And Malcolm, Walter's mentioned two important things there. Truth, which I think is somewhat taken for granted, and honesty as well, which there's a close relationship between the two. Yeah. So with that in mind, what was your initial obsession with trying to understand things, and are they factors that you've come to understand in a much better perspective?
Yeah, 100%. I think actually what I began to understand a lot of the time that people are actually avoiding the truth, or that deeper analysis, like we all do, because we're all a little bit scared of actually that fear of other people's opinions about us. So we'd all put on a front, we'd all put on this image. But the more you're avoiding that aspect, the less you are actually giving yourself the opportunity to make a difference. That was what I was really interested in. So we all circumnavigate that point to defend our egos. I mean, some really good, understandable psychological reasons to do that. But if we don't get to that truth, then fundamentally we're not really pushing ourselves on. We're not giving ourselves the opportunity to push ourselves on. We're staying stuck in that point. And that was that whole idea of that perception action couple. Whereabouts in that process are you getting stuck? And actually, and how can we free that up? Because the truth is, the truth is complex. It's not an easy thing, and actually, so many people do not want to explore the truth. They just want an easier way of understanding the world.
Well, it's interesting. Something Professor Song said on the last podcast. He said the one thing he would love everyone to take away is the ability to question why. And generally just question things. And usually in any walk of life, whether you're a student, whether you're a sports professional, a coach trying to figure out how to get the best from a team, or in any part of a business, because every role that anyone has in any company usually is there for a reason, and it has a measurable element of what success looks like.
Yep.
So to question why, given people are people, and we all live the human experience, that question, as you said, is extremely complex.
Yeah.
But it's the first step in effectively looking to elucidate the truth.
I love that. And actually, I think I always break down that. I have this little policy about breaking down the word. So question, quest, right? So you're questioning what the quest is. So what is it you want to know? Where is it you're going? How you're developing that agency in the world. So good questions actually lead to enlightenment. Actually, that's what we're talking about. But that's your through philosophy. But I think Professor Sung's absolutely correct there. It's absolutely about the question. And actually, and we're in a world where we're trying to adapt to the world. And actually, to be a good agent in the world is to really understand, well, where is it I'm going? And actually, what questions do I need to help me on that journey? Because if you're not asking those questions, then you're not updating your model of the world. You're not updating how you're perceiving the world. So ignorance can be bliss sometimes. Sometimes it's not knowing. So it is moving people into that element of really finding out that deeper little search about what this means to you. And then you find the answers, or at least you're exploring an upgrade, or at least you're exploring a different alternative.
Well, I think there are 2 points, and you can elaborate on these. One, the world is always changing around us. If we think about what life was like in 1984, maybe it wasn't quite like George Orwell was suggesting, but perhaps it's become a little more like that, or 1902. It's very obvious. So if you span out in time, it becomes quite clear. The music is different, culture's different, society's different, technology's different. But because of the human experience, we perhaps don't notice that incremental change, but it is, and it's obviously changing around us. So that then moves to the next point, which I think is fundamental to scale, which is senses. So the ability to sense, and actually there's one other thing which I think is absolutely critical, which you're bringing a lot of the knowledge and expertise to the table, but across any walk of life, subject matter expertise. The majority of people in the world don't instinctively naturally have access to minds and experience and life, but it's a culmination of that seen, observed, experienced, processed, the methodology that you just described there. And that really, I think, shows the incredible opportunity that AI has to bridge that gap, which is a technical improbability for the majority of people, to then give access to subject matter expertise to experience these factors. How would you elaborate on that?
It's exactly that, right? So we're in a world of abundance with AI, but just because we have abundance of knowledge doesn't mean it's being explained to you in the right way. So if you then do have an expert, a subject matter expert, and go back to that question of the why, of this is my why, can I ask a question to a subject matter expert in my own time, my own being, and one that I trust to help me steer me to my purpose, to my journey? I think that's where it becomes useful, because knowledge without that type of use is just wasted. And then the other side of sensory, you think, well, my ability to take in information or be aware of information, these are senses, but I could be cognitively overloaded, right? So I'm trying to figure a problem out. I don't have the ability to sense. I don't have the ability to be aware. I don't have the ability to be empathetic. So that's really, really important to know where you are at that moment, to be able to retrieve that information. And if you know that you can't because you're overloaded and you're being told so, you can value the experience and what it is. Is that the best of you at the moment? No, but you're just going to have to get by. You're going to have to bite down on your gumshoe, they say in boxing, and get by and survive, because that's what you've got. That's what you're fueled with at the moment. You don't have those senses.
So with that in mind, could you give 3 different sporting examples? And I do believe sport is something we can all relate to. If we're talking about a particular job function or role that perhaps many of the audience don't know, they're not in the world of finance, for example. So if you frame it as a finance guy, some people get it, probably most won't. Sport, we all know sport. We love sport. So I think it's a fantastic communicator to put the context of AI and the methodology and the consequence, because sport tends to be very public. If somebody doesn't do well, everyone knows and they're looking right at them. If they do well, they win something, but it's the performance, the winning is simply the net result of the activity over a period of time. Could you give us 3, without getting into trouble, different sporting examples that the audience could relate to, where there was cognitive overload, where somebody has really performed or perhaps hasn't performed?
Yeah. I always like to choose people that are really in the public eye, because that's easier for me, and I like to break client confidentiality or anything like that. So if you look at, for example, Djokovic, I think Djokovic is that perfect example of actually really understanding him, and how he's been on a journey, and he's really developed that whole sense of himself to perform at the best that he can do. And if you listen to his narrative, if you're really listening to his narrative, he actually talks about fundamentally about reading the situation, the ability to read that situation and adjust in that moment, and then apply that out back into the world. That is his process. And I think it came up in a conversation. Somebody was, because obviously if you're in the limelight like that, people, as you just said, people want to know what is it that makes him the difference. What's the difference in this process? And for him, I think it was they commented on, oh yeah, you're lucky. You've been gifted this set of mental skills. And he said, hold on. He said, no. They said, if you think that I'm out there and I don't have all this turmoil going on in my head, then you have to think again. He said, because that is happening. He said, however, I've helped myself and I've trained myself to think better in that moment. So the biggest difference is absolutely staying in context wherever you are. It's that ability to put yourself back into context. What is this moment demanding of you now? Yeah. That creates the performance. So I always think, well, who's the performer? How are they performing? And what's the performance? They all sync up. And actually, so it's the performing part. That's a doing thing. How is he doing that thing? An ability to stay in the moment and switch back into context, whatever is asking him, whatever is trying to pull him away from that moment. He has that ability to do. Now that only comes through really living the experience of putting yourself into that environment. It's not a thing you can just learn overnight. It's about you putting yourself out there to learn those sets of skills. It's why I'm really a big advocate of like vocational learning, actually learning in the job, because you're actually picking all those elements up. And in sport is another perfect example, like, because you're learning in the job. You're constantly learning in the job. And the best coaches are creating scenarios that test those points all the time. It's not just about, okay, you stand here, you stand there. They're putting on scenarios where they're adding in the pressure, or they're adding in decision making. So you have to learn in situ, and you have to learn in context. Now that is the difference. We get so pulled out of context by our egos, by the threats, that we forget where we are, and actually that's when we lose the performance. So, but that's critical for everybody. If we can just learn that simple process or a pattern to life, then I think that's going to make a big difference to everybody. And just going back to your point, I think with the AI, I think that helps us scale that up into a different element.
I'll give you an example, in recruitment, right? So whether that be the draft system in North America or the transfer window in the UK.
And you're referring to the NFL?
So NFL, NBA, NHL, which we've worked on, we utilised it on technology, or the transfer window in football. So we had a team, so they're recruiting people, and this happens across life. Who am I recruiting? How they're going to fit into our environment, and how do I get the best out of them? That's a learning process. As they come in, you know their nuances, the specifics about that person. So they had an athlete from the NHL draft. He had a really extreme behaviour in his need for affiliation, wanting to belong and understanding his role within that community or that team. So their onboarding procedure was to think, well, he's coming into professional sports. Let him see it. Let's see how he copes with pressure. Let's see how he stands on his own 2 feet. Comes into the building, he's got to stand on his own 2 feet. No one's particularly being welcoming him or catering to his needs. So he goes into panic because he's got such an extreme need to belong, extreme need for affiliation. Goes straight into a panic. Within 2 weeks, he wants to leave. There's a ton of bad press about the player, and people are assuming what's in that environment. Is the culture bad? Why is this young guy that's a very, very high pick within the draft system behaving like this? Was a good player in college. What's happened in this 2 to 4 week span? He ends up leaving. The new team who signs him is a client of ours, and we identify, look, he has an extreme need for affiliation. And through our AI, ask some suggestions. What would you do with this guy with an extreme need for affiliation? Number 1, show him his spot in the locker room. Show him where he sits. Number 2, introduce him to his captain. Number 3, bring his parent in for the first onboarding meeting. That guy goes on to make his NHL debut within 6 months. Did he forget how to play hockey? Did he become a bad player? Or did they not use technology to understand who that talent is they spent tons of money on, and how to unlock that talent and how to onboard them?
Well, it's an interesting world where there's such a high value on an individual, such an extreme pressure, so publicly visible as well. And it's easy to forget. I mean, I checked the Newcastle news, and obviously Alexander Isak is not signed for Arsenal at this point in time. Hopefully he won't. But they're always looking at, who they're going to sign, who going to left wing, right wing, new forward, and you look at players from other clubs. Then their headlines are out there, but they're humans.
Yeah,
they're human beings. I mean, I know from the music industry, people know the big names, and someone can meet a super successful artist, musician, and that could be the highlight of their year.
Yeah.
Getting a picture taken, being treated really nicely by this person. But that person equally, the star, is at work. And one mistake, because it could be the most silly thing, and they could just be upset for a moment. But if they don't respond in the right way at the right time in the public domain, then the impression that they could leave could go viral, and they are deemed, labelled, all manner of different things. And then there's all of that burden on top of everything else. I mean, they tend to be reasonably privileged people, but it's almost like, well, if you're privileged, that offsets your right to having a human experience.
Yeah.
But if anything, it's a very dangerous psychological position. And for those around who maybe don't understand, they go, well, why are they going crazy?
Yeah, and that was going to be my second sort of reference there, because one of the bits of what we've done was looking at a player, and when you can see this player, they have tendencies to be highly driven and highly committed. And now, in context, because you have to build in the context, because actually just this information without context can be a bit irrelevant. So you have to build the picture, and which we're able to do. But the potential of that person was to have a bit of burnout. Right, now when you were talking about like cognitive load, so that fundamentally would actually affect their behaviour, and actually the potential of actually acting unusually or out of the ordinary was a potential risk. And I think we saw that, and we worked with one that was
a
an
basketball
NBA
player.
Yeah.
So the same thing. It's like, and again, as Malcolm says, context. So if you look at from a sports point of view, you're a finance business, you're a sales business, and you're thinking, hold on, I've got someone who's really driven and really committed. Hallelujah, right? It's a eureka moment. But also, if you look from a sports point of view, if that person's injured and they're trying to come back from injury, they're going to be overly pushing themselves, at higher risk to re-injuring themselves, because they want to drive, they want to be committed. So it's down to you knowing about that, being self-aware of that, but say, look, let me tell you, it's an 8-week recovery time. You're trying to push it to 4 weeks. You're going to re-injure yourself because of your tendencies in the context of this situation. So let's, make that 8 weeks, 7 weeks, 6.5. But let's not push it for 4, because that natural element to want to overcommit, to overdrive it.
So you need to keep them engaged. And we worked with one of their physical trainers, and a physiotherapist actually, and actually met one of their part of the medical team to actually look at what would be the best way of getting them back to fitness, and how do you plan that? You want to keep that drive, you want to keep that motivation. So how do you communicate that in a much more effective way without diminishing it? Because of the other side of that was, if you've got a high drive and you're high committed, then you're now out of something. Where does all that energy go? That's the other side of this, just as you were saying. And what other complications are going on in life. But now you start to pick up the narrative. Now you're really understanding what's driving, what's motivating, and now we can make some better informed decisions of how we might work better with them.
Because it must be very difficult. I mean, a former England player that I know had told me what the experience was like having a long-term injury. You go into training every day and you see everyone out there doing the thing that you can't do. All you want to be is out there doing that. You're on the treatment table. You're watching your fitness go, the rest of your body. You're trying to do what you can within reason, but it's not comparable to really being in the thick of it. And months can go by, even 3 months. He said to me, imagine just sitting there, now count 3 months, never mind the minutes.
Yeah.
And all the time, 3 months is actually a long time. We think of it, that plays out for 3 months, but to live it is a completely different thing. And it's the psychological damage that can occur. And you're also aware you're getting further and further and further away from fitness. So even when you are better, that's the beginning of a new uphill journey, which it's this perpetual distance.
And again, just being aware of that. So if we look at that for someone who's used to spending and expanding a lot of energy, physical and mental, right? And now that body's got all that energy stored up. Where's it going to go? Overthinking, behavior that's out of character, wanting to go and spend it somewhere that may not be rewarding or fitting to what you're trying to do, because it's there, and you worry more and you obsess more. But being a good physiotherapist, or being aware of this in that specific person's character, but also being able to actually read the battery, to look at how much energy is there at the moment, and I'm going to spend some of that for them. I'm going to put them in trying situations. On the other side, whether you be a sports star or a student, that's the time to build resilience, right? You're going through, let's do some stuff that's hard, that's going to try the body and the mind, because I'm going to build resilience. So as a sports star, it may happen again.
And actually, and go back to your point, obviously I've been in that situation, and different people respond differently. And that's what we're trying to get at. It's how do we understand? We just can't say, well, they'll all respond this way. So if you've got players who are maybe highly conscientious and agreeable, they will like to be connected with the social side, because they'll want to be learning and staying in touch with the techniques and what's changing, what's not changing, because that's where their control mechanism is. That's what's driving their system. Now, you might be more sort of driven and minded about aspirations. Now, turning up at that rehab center is just a reminder every day of actually that you're not there and you're not doing that. So it's actually, that's the beauty of this, when we really start to understand those patterns of behavior and those tendencies. And because they're all adaptive behaviors, that's what we're trying to, nothing wrong or right. It's getting them to understand that's how they're responding, and how can we support them to be better at that. So it might just be one of the things we introduced as VR. So it could be just through the virtual reality, you're still getting the experience of being in the game, but you're not obviously putting pressure on your injury. So you're still getting those connections. What's the right thing for that person to help them on their rehab is the beauty of this. And it can do a lot of that sort of complexity for you and support you. And you don't have to have the psychologist sitting on your shoulder saying, oh, by the way, have you thought this, have you thought that? It's ours that's Egan's skilled helper. You know, you want people to be more skilled within that environment. You know, it's about good communication. It's about good understanding. You know, and I know if I sat down and I reflected to you about, and you felt that I understood you, then that communication barrier is broken, or at least, or maybe gone. It's more effective. There's no barriers to it. It's more effective in that space. And if we can do that, then we can accelerate the process.
And I think it is really important to state, if you replaced the word left back with sales manager and central holding midfielder with head of operations, you could replace all of that. The only difference is huge amounts of people aren't watching everyday life, but it is of equal importance. You know, how the one interesting thing that I've always found about music is for every person that listens to a song, it is undeniably and irrevocably their experience in response to the song. Nobody can tell them you're not feeling that. It's a genuine, sincere moment. And you can't then say, because somebody's more famous or because they earn more money, that their response emotionally has more value than anyone else's. So I think with that as a kind of leveler, to apply this form of technology, to be a student, to be in any walk of life, to have access and the opportunity, and something Song refers to quite a lot, democratizing AI, not in a political sense, but in an access to technology which opens opportunity which otherwise wouldn't be available. And I think that is an interesting part of the mission, and flips to the next bit, which I'd love you to give your interpretation of, through the context of what you could do and what you are doing and what could happen in the world. How do you consolidate what the general public narrative from the leading companies currently stands at? And do you agree with that?
In short, no. I think it's about, going back to that point, can you empower individuals with specific experts and domains, right? It's about having that, Malcolm called it, that Jiminy Cricket on your shoulder, right? That psychologists or that elite performance specialists are having that information, right? You know, and doing something with it. How is it empowering you as a business or an individual?
But it's not just information. This is what I find interesting. Because every individual is different, the context critically is always different, the information surrounding is different, and the bidirectional response, and that's a key element. So if I say something to you and you respond, that I'm reading your response, then you're reading mine. So it's a flow. So it's not just, here's some information and there you go, anyone could access that information. It's the methodology, it's the fluidity of information, it's the engagement. That's where AI enables something which static information couldn't possibly deliver.
100%. I think that's spot on. We're a dynamic system, and if you're helping people to really understand that dynamic interplay through understanding that person more effectively, then it allows you to be upskilled in that moment. I love that idea about democratizing the whole idea. That's what it should be about. It's about, for that humanity, how are we improving that whole process for everybody? But what we're never given a manual about that to help us understand other people, to be more effective. In fact, a lot of us are actually come from backgrounds that are a million miles away from that, because the role models, the adults, the support staff, these are all given us negative ways of looking. Well, now, I'm not saying that's for everybody. Some people come through that and they do really well. I'm not saying that. But there's also a problem in there. And if we could just actually help people understand themselves better, how to communicate better, understand this lovely interplay of the world, if we can just support them on that journey, then I think that's where this is actually at. If we can really make that difference. And when we talk about elite athletes, in my view, we're only talking about elite athletes because we're looking at them, how they optimize a particular one thing, how they play that sport. Because we know there's a lot of elite athletes off the field, that's not how they're behaving, and we all know that. So it is that one thing. So how can we just take those fundamentals of how we optimize behavior and feed that into the system so we can help people optimize themselves within that? And I think that's the beauty of the AI. We can scale this up. You can scale it across where we can identify areas in society that really need that help, like education, and people with mental health potentially. And actually we can scale out where they just have, I think I heard one country in Europe, it's something like one psychologist for 1,000 people or 10,000 people. Wow, when's that ever going to happen? It's not going to happen. But if you've got the potential to scale things up that AI is providing, as long as that support mechanism is well thought out and well structured, I think then that's the thing that makes the difference.
I think, again, it's empowering you with lots of data, lots of heavy lifting, lots of expertise for you to go and make decision. It's you at the end of the day, the human being's in charge. If you look at it from a point of view, back into sports, you had a game in the quarterfinals of the Champions League, and the set piece coach is telling the player, cross the ball. That player, information, set piece coach, he's got all that data, where the keeper's standing, etc., decides to take a shot at goal, scores. Okay, empowered, the individual had all the information given to him, but still the human being looked what's in front of him, how they felt, and they succeeded. So can we give you best practice? Can we give you world-class coaching? Can we give you access to the best science? And then would that help you make the decision that is best for you or the way that you want to go?
So where can people find out information about what you've been up to?
pki.com.
So it's PEAK.
AI.com, and across LinkedIn. We're just about to launch some new exciting technologies in the next 8 weeks. That's bridging that gap away from sports into a wider domain.
Excellent. And Malcolm, what would you see the next 1 to 3 years looking like in the world of AI and humanity?
Yeah, I think people are worried about AI, and I think there's a massive role for it. And I think there's a meta crisis in the world. And that meta crisis is a little bit around people lost meaning and purpose. And I think the threat of AI is also adding into that lack of purpose. So I believe there's an opportunity for AI to grow in a relationship to humanity for the better of humanity. And there's a real opportunity for us to really understand ourselves better, and actually in how we can actually get programs that are going to help other people more effective and efficient. And that's scalability. So my view is in 3 years that AI is seen potentially as a tool for good, a tool for actually meeting some of the issues that we've got to face. But starting that on a narrative, a conversation about how can we be better as a human being? What responsibilities are we taking as human beings that are going to make a difference? I think I was listening to something the other day, and I think my final point here is, because sometimes we sit there and we can see the things that are going on in the world, like climate crisis, and think, well, what difference can I actually make here to climate crisis? Is it really going to make a difference? I get a different car or whatever that's going to make that impact? And the truth is yes. But because it's seen as actually you've got no real power into the world, that actually it's a futile exercise for you, then you don't bother with it. I think there's the potential of getting that, because you get that narrative and you get that narrative rolling, then you get that agency into people about how they can really make a difference. And I think then that builds. That's what I think I would like to see over the next 2 or 3 years.
Well, the late Gino Strada, founder of Emergency, who we knew, one of the most poignant things he said to me was, and I'll paraphrase it, but effectively, kindness is an act of peace. Practice it in your daily life. If everyone took self-responsibility for that, and this is my interpretation of it, and how we actually made decisions as individuals and were able to do so better, the aggregate equals a huge change. And my position on AI as it stands and where I believe it will go is not that it's going to take over from people, but it will empower people, and that then transcends to companies, to how we conduct business, how we're entertained, and it will make democratize the ability for more people to access capabilities which they otherwise would not have access to, and to excel. Not a replacement, but an enhancement.
100%. Upgrade the system.
Exactly. Brilliant.
Brilliant. Okay.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Graeme.